morning. It is Amanda Cassar, and I am joined by the lovely Peter Baines today, who has a very extraordinary work history. Welcome, Peter, to Financial Secrets Revealed.
Good morning, and thank you for having me, Amanda.
Now, can you please tell us a little bit about your history with the police? I believe you've been to everywhere from Bali to Thailand to Leon to Saudi Arabia. So can you give us a little insight as to how you came to be such a globetrotter and what your role was?
Yeah, it sounds pretty sexy when you frame it like that, doesn't it? It's,
Until you know what you were doing, yes.
yeah. I joined the police, went to uni after school and quickly realised that uni at that time didn't serve what I was looking for. I bailed out of that, which is funny because I'd go back and spend 13 years studying at university, doing different courses and different degrees and so forth. So, but yeah, joined the cops pretty young and worked in uniform in Sydney, then progressed through to, ended up in the forensic area. And that was really because I got sick of doing domestics and dealing with drunks and thought there's got to be something better, and found my way into the crime scene unit, and that really became a career within itself, and worked as a forensic practitioner, attending scenes of major crime, suspicious deaths and homicides and fires, and like your real life CSI guy, examining scenes, recording the scenes, interpreting the evidence, and presenting that at court. And then that led to the international work that you talked about. I worked in Bali after the bombings, and then Thailand after the tsunami, and then I was seconded to Interpol and worked with Interpol in Lyon in France, writing a classified paper on counterterrorism around chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear threats, and then spent time with UN Office of Drug and Crime, and then resigned from the police in 2009, and realised that I'd been gone for a couple of years on this secondment, and the thought of going back to what I used to do wasn't all that appealing, and so took the leap and resigned.
Wow. And it was really your work in Thailand that's, I suppose, inspired the current life you're living. So can you tell us a little bit about what you did in Thailand and how that's led to where you are now, running a charity?
Yeah, so the work in Thailand was, I was deployed as one of the Australian leaders, leading the Australian team and an international team, and we were over there to identify those who died. Now, as a result of the Boxing Day tsunami, there was somewhere between 250 and 300,000 people who would die across three main countries, across Indonesia and Banda Aceh, Thailand and Sri Lanka. And in Thailand, we did what's called disaster victim identification. So we're there to identify those who died and send them home, whether they were from Australia or around the world or Thai citizens. And
I understand there was quite a few different countries involved in that repatriation of the bodies as well.
Yeah, we had 36 different countries represented in the DVI work, in the identification work, and there was 450 forensic staff who came from those countries, and it was and remains, the world's largest disaster victim identification attempt undertaken. Thousands bigger than 9/11, and thousands bigger than anything that's been done on that identification work, and it was while I was there, met a group of kids who had all lost their families, and thought, perhaps I could do something for them. And I realised I couldn't change what had happened, but we could change what happened next.
So you did say that I think there were over 30 children living under a tarp in an area where you were serving at the time?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I met a group of kids, 32 kids living in a tent, and that was in the grounds of one of the temples just near where we were doing all the forensic work, and all of those kids had lost their families, their parents, extended families, and their homes, and there was a lady that came down from Bangkok, a Thai lady who took, I guess, care of the kids, and then with another forensic practitioner who I was working with from the UK, the two of us decided that we'd do something to raise money and hopefully be able to create a home for these kids, and that was the first project when we opened that home in 2006.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah,
So how many homes across Thailand are there now?
Yeah, 7 homes across Thailand, and you know the direct the kids that come directly from the tsunami is obviously very few now because of the just the the time that's passed and the age of those kids, but it doesn't seem as though the demand for support changes. But that we've got 350 kids across those 7 properties. We've got an ongoing university scholarship program that we fund kids through uni. We've got internships that we arrange for the kids, and we really measure ourselves not on the numbers of kids, not on the number of homes, or because any charity, Amanda, you should be working to shut yourself down.
Yeah, absolutely.
The ultimate success is ceasing to exist because the need's not there. But,
I know you're working with children. Like I think recently I saw there was a practically a brand new baby under a month old delivered to one of the homes, right through to, you've got your 18, 19, 20-year-old kids now in university that you've seen through the life of the project. So, you're also, I think the children in northern Thailand, there's some rescue situations you've had to do. So, yeah, unfortunately, the need isn't going away anytime soon by the look.
No, like Thailand's it's a developing country, and to be honest, you could do exactly the same in Australia. Like Australia has a massive problem with it might not be directly related, but there's certainly huge problems here in Australia with kids in family situations where they're at risk, and thankfully we've got the government's support to look after those kids. But in Thailand that doesn't exist.
No.
And so we provide that long-term care where it's required for those kids.
Yeah, we don't even have the orphanage system here anymore, do we? So it's still very, very different over
which
there.
Is good, which is good. Like all things being equal, the best place for kids is in families.
Absolutely.
But no
it's
good just taking the kids out of our homes and putting them in homes in the community and thinking it's a better situation, because unless you've got then the support and services to ensure that the kids are then looked after, that they're fed, that they're not being mistreated, they're not being abused, they're going to school, and it's a very simplistic view to think just close them down and put them into the community, because it's actually where some of the kids that we have come from is where they're taken out of the community by government, by police, by the hospitals, and given to us because they're in situations of risk and abuse.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. I had a security guard recently I approached at a community centre, and I said, why do you need a security guard at a community centre? He's like, are you living under a rock? And I went, well, yeah, I really do. And he was telling me, it was a place of handover for children in domestic violence. Children have tried to hurt themselves, and, self-harm cases at these community centres. The homeless are often there. There's drug addiction, there's ice addiction. So to me, it was like I thought you went to a community centre for an engagement party or a training workshop. I'm just so naive, and gratefully so. But it was when I first, I suppose, joined in. I heard you speak at a conference back in 2008, but I was very fortunate, I think, in 2016 to win a ticket to the slums with you at one of your conferences. I was very privileged to be at one of your Future of Leadership forums and got a ticket. So that it was such a beautiful, eye-opening experience to be able to help out with that, to see where the dollars go, to those in need. And I think you're one of the very few charities I do know where 100% of the funds go to where it's needed without an administration cost. So that's a pretty amazing, probably not a brilliant business structure, but it's a pretty amazing charity structure.
Yeah, look, I think the charity sector shouldn't be, in my opinion, measured on what it spends in admin or fundraising. It should be measured on the transparency, because it's, and the model that we've got, it just works for us. And the reason that we're able to do it is because we created a social enterprise in 2011, a company that's sole purpose is to generate income that underwrites the operating costs of the charity. So it's something that's, served us well. But as I say, it's I don't think it's necessarily the best thing to view charities on. It's more around the transparency.
Yeah, and the impact of the works, the good it's doing, which is fabulous. Now, I understand that you're probably a lot more savvy speaking around leadership forums and charitable and doing good and that sort of thing. So it may be unusual to have you on a financial podcast. But one of the things I really loved is that, you come from this very middle-class Australian background. You've travelled the world, lived this, I suppose, jet-setter life outside looking in. You've worked in the slums. So you've seen, reality all around the world. And one of the things I loved asking people when I wrote the book was, what did your parents teach you about money? So can you give us a little bit about your growing up in Australia, your family situation, and answer that question? What did your parents teach you about money when you were growing up?
Yeah, I guess it was, you said we're middle class. I think we're probably working class, to be honest, and my parents are separated when I was young, and it was a real struggle, financially. There were times where, it was very touch and go around the house and what mum could provide for us, and both working class parents who came from similar families, and not high levels of education either within the parents, and I think what I learned was from them both was the hard work was where money came from, and for them it was never around investments or the stock exchange or superannuation policies or property investments or anything like that. It was you work hard and you'll be paid, and that's how you live. So I think when I think about financial literacy, what I took from my parents was that from them was that hard work would reward you.
Yeah, and sometimes it's those unspoken lessons, isn't it, that we take away rather than a direct sit down, have a chat about money. But you did buy a block of land pretty early for someone who hadn't had that financial goal in life, that this is what you do, you go and buy a house. So how did that come about, that you got into the property market so early?
Yeah, that's it's I think about it now and I go, that was quite bizarre. Like I was 18 and my girlfriend and I both got personal loans, and we bought a block of land at Kawana Waters at Maroochydore, and we paid less than 20 grand for it, and
I think it'd be worth a little more now.
Oh, geez, I'd like to have it now, Amanda. But who doesn't say that about property they sold at some point? But I think what it did was, it certainly gave us that the routine, or the need to save and pay a mortgage and be diligent about that. And then next thing you know, you demonstrated to banks that you can be a responsible borrower and pay your mortgages. And then when it came time to make the next property purchase, we had some capital behind us in the equity within the land, and from then it was something for me that that was where working in the police, it was never the case that we had all of this excess income that many of your clients might have had, but it was a case that we're able to keep accumulating property using the equity that we had, and ended up with several investment properties in Tamworth, and I think that's Australia feels comfortable or Australians feel comfortable investing in property, don't they?
Absolutely. It's the bricks and mortar. I've got one at the moment who's buying his first investment, and it's a display home, and he's out there every weekend just standing in it. He's so excited.
Yeah,
You can see it, feel it, touch it. He's there. It's exciting. I remember you said, for people where they have a set salary, there's not a lot of overtime. It means you need that discipline to be able to do. You have to live within your means. You're forced to do that, which is a hard lesson for some people when credit comes so easily these days.
Yeah.
So it's a big lesson that you obviously took away quite early to start that little property portfolio. Yeah. So it sounds like everything just went along beautifully, but I'm guessing life isn't like that, and you probably did have some financial setbacks. So did you have any low points in your financial story after getting this lovely little property portfolio?
Oh, more just as you say, life takes twists and turns, and I separated from my wife in between tours of Thailand. And, at the time we were living in Sydney, we had 3 kids in private school. My wife wasn't working, and we had a mortgage to pay in Sydney. And, there's not a lot of money left out of a public servant's income when you've got those commitments. And separating, it was at the time where I decided to start the charity. And at that point in my life, I couldn't have been at a lower point, on all measures, physically, mentally, emotionally, financially. I was as close to broken as I've ever been. And there was a time where, I lived in some pretty shitty accommodation because I just had no money, and, traveled around with my possessions in the boot of the police car, marked police car I was issued with, and no one knew just how touch and go things were financially. But thankfully that all turned itself around, and certainly enjoy a very different life these days.
So here you are at the lowest point ever, committing to raise money for children in Thailand to have a home, and you're living in boarding houses and a car yourself. So it's a crazy moment, I suppose, looking back to witness that.
Yeah, and it wasn't something that certainly wasn't by design, and it was the case that I meet a lot of people, as you say, I speak at a lot of conferences, and people who say, I'd love to do what you've done in relation to the work around hands and so forth. But then they follow it up with, and it's, the time's not right, or it's, when the kids are through school, or when the kids have finished university, or when I've, paid off the house, and you wait for the right time to come, and there's a good chance it'll never come, and I think, the commitment for the kids in Thailand that I made, I had no idea how I was going to raise money to build this home. It was, it was touch and go how I was feeding myself, let alone thinking that, and I didn't have a big network of friends that we could do traditional fundraising. The whole corporate world was completely foreign to me. I had no connections into there. As I said, there was no family money to rely on. But committing to do something for someone else, benefited me in a way that I never could have imagined.
So I believe someone handed you a card at one stage and said, why don't you tell your story? And you thought it was a dumb idea, threw the card away. But obviously it stayed and played on your mind.
Yeah, in between tours of Thailand, I was introduced by a mutual friend to a guy called Matt Church, who's a bit of a legend within the speaking industry in Australia. And the 3 of us had lunch, and Matt handed me his card, and he talked about the speaking industry, and the money that you pay, the travel, the opportunities, and so forth. And knowing what I was doing, he said to me, I think, there could be something in this for you. And I quite literally walked away from lunch and dropped his card in the first bin that I passed, because I thought, this is rubbish. Like, I'm in the cops. What could I possibly have to offer people in the financial services sector, for example? What possible value could I have? And dismissed the idea out of hand. And it was only when I went back to Thailand on my next rotation, saw the kids and thought, made that commitment, thought, well, how am I going to raise money? And I thought, if half of what Matt has said about this speaking industry, if half of it is true, then that's how I'll raise the money. And I got back in contact with him and said, what you're talking about, was that true? And he said, absolutely. He said, if he said, there's no doubt you'll have a story. He said, if you can tell a story, well, then you'll be right. And that was what I did. I started telling the story. I got paid for that. And the funds that I was paid went towards building the first home. And the more I spoke, the more I was invited to speak, and the more money I got. And then I had some, incredible donations that came from speaking at conferences where I've never asked for them, but I've had several. And I was only talking about this the other day, probably half a dozen occasions where I've been given a check of $250,000 or more on the back of a speaking presentation. And,
wow.
and it's somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. You're invited to share your story, and then, to have, incredibly generous individuals or organisations. And, when I think about them, Ray O'Rourke from Lang O'Rourke gave me a check for $250,000. Brett Godfrey, the former CEO of Virgin, who was invited to see me speak and invited me to his home and did exactly the same.
Wow.
The NATA, the National Association of Retail Traders of Australia, have been supporting me, and they were the first to give me $250,000 after I spoke for them in San Francisco, and it's continued, and it's just been this amazingly blessed life I've been able to live, and it was all because I decided to do something for someone else, But it's very much the case that I believe in the work I do with organisations now around helping them build corporate social responsibility programs that are a profit centre back to the business, and a lot of organisations and family foundations and individuals will support their favourite charity and think that they've got corporate social responsibility as a business. You'll talk to them, they say, yeah, we've got a CSR program. And I'll say, what is it? And they say, well, we give this to this organisation. But, really, Amanda, that's just philanthropy. Now, there's nothing wrong with philanthropy. It's a good thing, but it's not going to help your business grow. And, the work I've been doing with organisations is if, as an individual, a family unit, a business, large or small, if you're involved with your favourite organisation and it's not a profit centre to you, then you're leaving money on the table. And for businesses, it's around, customer attraction, staff retention, brand differentiation, new markets. You do CSR right, and it will make you as an individual or your business more profitable. And people in Australia, we've grown up with this culture of saying, no, but that's not why we do it. But here's the crazy thing. If as a business you grow through your association with a charity and your profits grows, well, then there's more to give away. And right now is a real example of why that needs to be the case. During difficult times and in COVID, I think we've seen two things: either business flourish or business really struggle. There's not many people that haven't been affected in some way because of what we've gone through. Now, if your corporate social responsibility is a cost center to the business, so you're giving away more than you're getting, well, then in difficult times, you start to wind back your commitment. You tighten the purse strings and you say, well, we can't really commit what we used to right now. We'll pick that up in some future time when the economy's better. But this is when the charity sectors, when people lean in and rely on their resources more. It's in difficult times. So if we've got corporate or business or individuals saying, I can't support charity now because it's difficult times, that's when people are relying on them more. Mm. So if we can create these relationships so they're profit centers to your business, to you as an individual, you're more likely to stay and be more involved, which allows the charity or the organisation you love and support to do more of the great work. So it's this whole journey of that I've been through of learning that, at Hands, as you know, we're not about soliciting donations. We're about providing value back to individuals and organisations who then support us more. So it's just almost reverse relationship where we start from.
And I think you've even written a book about this, haven't you? Doing good by doing good, which, then you've gone into author space as well as public speaker from Copland. So it's been
that was
such a journey for you.
I wrote my first book, and it was more just the stories, and then I started all this consulting work, and then I had Wiley, who's Australia's biggest business book publisher, approached me and offered me a book deal, and around this CSR stuff, and I said no. It was like 6 months we were backwards and forwards with me saying no, I don't want to write another book, and then saying no, I think you should, and then we finally agreed, and it, it really, I guess it's that, their view was what I was doing and speaking about and doing had a unique, I guess, aspect and view to it, certainly within the Australian publishing market.
Yep. So I will put that in the show notes so people can look that one up as well.
Sure. So
the best financial advice you were ever given, now you originally thought that was basically get a good solid job, earn a good income, the police force job offered great healthcare and benefits. I suppose those schemes back then were just outrageously good to public servants. So what changed over time that's, I suppose, no longer the advice you'd give your own children, So what's different for you? What's the good advice you'd give now?
Oh, I think the best advice that I would give is surround yourself with good people, who have a financial advisor who's invested in you, and don't be afraid to leave when they stop serving you. And if you're taken for granted, if you're not big enough for them, or find someone that is invested in you, listens to you, is part of the journey that you want to embark on. And I think in the service of professional services, it can be the case that whether it's around accounting or financial advice or legal or whatever, that you go to that person for them to help you with your needs, and then I think there can be a drift and a transition where you just then become serving their needs, where you're just paying their invoices, and they've taken you a bit for granted. So I think it's when I talk to my kids, it's about finding people that are invested in them, people that they feel comfortable and trust their advice, but also understanding that you don't have to hold all of this knowledge yourself, and to rely on those that have made it their profession to understand those areas you don't.
I'm a big fan of outsourcing myself, whether it's getting the ironing or the cleaning done, right through to getting professionals who are invested in learning and knowing. Sure. So it's a great idea. Now, you've also had a health scare along the way, I understand. How does that impact things? A lot of people, say it gives you a new perspective. Did it for you?
There's it's an interesting question. The health scare was just found a spot on my leg, and had been there for a while. I actually had it checked by who I thought was a cancer specialist, or so forth, and who'd said to me, "No, you're fine. Don't worry about it." And then my partner I was living with at the time, she just kept hounding me, saying, "You need to get it checked again," and went and got it checked. And then the doctor the second time said, the only way really for us to know is to take a biopsy. And he took a biopsy and then contacted me and said, we need to remove it. It's not great, and we'll take a larger portion of it out. And took the larger portion, and I was actually I was then speaking at a conference in Perth, and he rang me and said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm in Perth." He said, "You need to be..."
Phone call to receive.
Yeah, he said, "Well, you need to be admitted to hospital." And I said, "Well, I'm in Perth." He said, "You're not listening. You need to be admitted to hospital." And I said, "Well, with respect," I said, "You're not listening." I said, "I'm in Perth." And it was a funny thing, like I was speaking for one of the big councils over there, and they had me speak for 2 days, and it was mirror of the second day. So they took half of their workforce one day, half the second. And so I got this phone call that afternoon, and then, had to stand up on stage the next day and motivate this group of counselling employees, knowing that I'd received this notice. And I flew home and went back to the specialist, and it's a real lesson in communication. I walked in and he said, grab the phone. He said, "Who are you again?" He opened it. He goes, "Oh, that's right. You're the one with the aggressive tumour." And I went, "Okay, since when did we call it that?" And then I was referred on to a cancer specialist, oncologist at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, and to the melanoma unit, and went in for the first consult, and he started by talking about survival rates, and I went, "Holy shit, when did this all happen?" And got through all that fine, and I don't know if it's it might be the right thing to say or the expected thing to say, that I turned around and viewed life differently. The flowers looked brighter, the smells were stronger. I loved my kids more. I fought less, and I don't know, like it's something that I've been exposed to a lot of stuff, and things on a level that obviously changes you incrementally as a person. And having had the career that I've had, and the work I've done along the way, you can't do that and not be changed. And I think all of these experiences, good, bad, and indifferent, just make you the person that they are. And so it's not like there was, and even starting hands wasn't an epiphany. It wasn't as though I've gone, the light has shone upon me and I've gone, oh, I've got to do something. It was a case I've met the kids and went, okay, well, this, makes sense to start, and it's made sense to continue. So, maybe I'm just a simple bloke who hasn't reflected enough on the lessons of life, but I'm where I am, having travelled through that journey of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been, like you said, so many experiences. So you did eventually get yourself a financial advisor. I think he'd heard you speak at a conference. So you have surrounded yourself by around, now that you've got the charities and trusts, and that you've got accounting services, financial advice yourself. Do you have a top personal financial tip that you would like to share, or that you would like to pass on to your children? Or
yeah, I guess it's one of those things that for me, it's what's worked for me, and whether it's financial or whatever, it might be that the goals or things that we aspire to sometimes can seem big and a long way away. And and whether it's starting a university degree, or saving for a house, or whatever it is, sometimes the scale of what we're proposing, or our ambitions or desires, can be so big that we might not start. But the best time to start is now. And the more we do, the clearer we become. And looking at Hands now, it's an organisation that's raised over $30 million. We've got growing alumni of kids that we funded through university, who have degrees and living and travelling throughout the world working. And we stopped these kids dying from HIV. And you look at it and say, we operate in 3 different countries, where we're the largest contributing Australian charity to Thailand. And you say there's some significant stuff that you can line up here as a way of measure. But it just started with making a commitment. If I'd started and thought, well, this is what we're going to achieve, you go, well, how am I ever going to do that? That's too big and not achievable. So whether it's related to finance, where people say, this is what I want to do, I think it's starting. And if you wait until you've got all of the answers to all the possible questions, well, you won't start.
No, exactly. Very, very true. And like you said, if you'd sat there that day and went, right, I want to raise $30 million for a charity in Thailand, whereas, we just want to get these kids in a tent with a roof over their head. It's those bite-sized pieces, isn't it? Yeah. And sometimes, like you said, you don't know where it ends up either.
That's right.
So it can be a big, beautiful thing. So I did ask you what you'd like to leave your children to learn about money. And for you, it's always been about property, right from when you were young and you had a chat with them, and your own personal journeys very much property focused. It's been kind to you. Do you still believe that that's the best for you personally? That's what you've known and loved, and still go that way?
Yeah, look, it's as I've grown, I've got recently changed financial advisors because of that point that the bloke that took me into his firm to start with is he's retired and moved out of the firm, and I was just picked up by someone else within the firm, and just never heard from him, and never had any contact with him. And I went, well, how could you possibly have any idea of where my personal circumstances are, what my ambitions are, what goals we're working towards if I don't hear from you, and so left them and went to somewhere else, and I've actually got my briefing call with him this afternoon, but he's very much around diversifying the investments, but I guess the difference for me was I never had money to invest. It was borrowing against the equity from that very first block of land, and all of the property investments that I had for so long were positively geared as investments because I didn't have the income to support them. So to think, well, put your money into shares or bonds or whatever it might be, I didn't have money to do that, so it was what's kind of served me, and it was easy to understand. I could see the investment there, I could see the capital growth, I could see the rental income, and that was good for me. It's interesting. I've got 3 kids, and 2 of them last year bought houses. One of them's 23 and just bought his first house, and my oldest son, who's 28, has done the same. And my daughter in the middle, she's going, I don't want to do that. And she's got other things that. So I think it's for them. I'm happy to share what's worked for me, but they need to make their own journey according to where they feel is the right thing.
So I know you've got a lovely new bride in the beautiful Claire, who also works alongside the Hands Across the Water charity with her soulful experiences that I'm very proud to have taken part in. Do you guys have a personal family budget? If we go right back to basics, this is 101 in financial literacy. Do you have a personal one? And do you also have one, I suppose, for your consulting agency and for Hands? How do you manage money on I suppose, a daily level?
Yeah, so on all of those levels, certainly for us in a family that we've got, we look at our goals for the year financially, and up until COVID, the thing that we traveled so much with work, and but we always loved the opportunity to escape and travel personally, and a big thing for us is snowboarding, and whether it's a couple of trips to New Zealand or across to Japan each year or so forth. And so that was always part of our budgeting, is looking at what our commitments were for the year, what we wanted to achieve, and not down on a micro level. And I think because of my income, the way that I've been paid through the speaking industry is it's almost boom or bust. You can
especially in the middle of a pandemic.
No, absolutely. You can have weeks where I could earn more in a good month than I would in a year in the police. But then you can go for like certainly COVID time, there was no income coming in, and so that whole it's very different than saying, well, we'll both be paid this fixed amount and that's what we've got. It's mine is just as I say, just all over the place. But with Hands, obviously we've got up until last year, our income, we needed to raise about $2.5 million a year. We work with each of the homes they have their own forecast, their budget that they do year on year per calendar year. And we do a budget variance meeting with them to look at where the changes are, either up or down, and understand why. And then we allocate money to the homes on a monthly basis. And then anything outside of that agreed on budget, that we have what we call a special request, where they can say to us, okay, this is what's gone on outside of budget, and this is what we'd like to be funded. And then, depending upon the scale or size of that, has to have the approval process. But operating the entity that we have with, in Thailand and then here in Australia, you can't operate business without a good financial, awareness and acumen of what's coming in and what's going out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a shame that it's still not taught right back in primary school about money in, money out. And look, hopefully that will change over time, where financial literacy will be just 101 for all the kids. So, well, thank you so much for sharing your own personal journey in finances, leadership, the whole kit. It's been really interesting, Peter. And one of the things I love that you say is, if we do nothing will ever change, and that applies across everything, doesn't it? So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Fantastic.
Well, thank you again for your time, Peter. Appreciated the chat.
My pleasure. Thanks, Amanda.